Hello, and welcome to the beginning of reality. Basically, right now, the Jewish people are in this Jewish month, which is a very special Jewish month. Just test this. Good. So this is a very special Jewish month that we're in, which is actually the 11th month of the Jewish calendar, called the month of Av. And thousands of years ago, the Jewish people used to have a temple on the Temple Mount in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, which is called the chosen house. It's the house on the location where the Creator said that he chose to make himself revealed exclusively there. So, first, King Solomon built the first Jewish temple in Jerusalem under the instructions that were written by King David, his father. And even before King David, it says in the commentaries that Moshe himself actually received a blueprint of what the temple should look like from the Creator directly on Mount Sinai. And this blueprint was passed down through the generations until King David finally had it. Then King David made some more final plans, and then his son, King Solomon, actually built it approximately 2,500 years ago, give or take a few seconds. Then, that Temple of Solomon, which the main purpose of the temple, first of all, is to house, first of all, the Ark of the Covenant, which is the golden ark that was built in the times of Moshe, that had the tablets that Moses himself received from the heavens inside of them, which contain within them the entire Torah. And a second primary function of the Beis HaMikdash, of the chosen house, is this thing called the altar, the Jewish Mizbeach, which is where the Jewish people used to offer daily sacrifices to the Creator every day. And through those two things, the Ark of the Covenant and the altar, then the Creator would be revealed in the physical universe. That was the main function of the Beis HaMikdash. So, first King Solomon built one in Yerushalayim, the Temple Mount, which stood for 410 years. Then, for different reasons, the temple was destroyed by the Creator. In a simple way, it was destroyed by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. But really, it was the Creator doing it. And the reason that is explained is because the Jewish people did not say the blessing of Hashem's name before they learned the Torah. Nowadays, before Jewish people learn the Torah, they have to say, "Oh, blessed are you, Hashem, who actually gives us the Torah." Back then, they didn't say the blessing of the Torah, so therefore, it's like as if they didn't recognize fully that the Torah was from the Creator. It was more an intellectual pursuit. That's one of the reasons given for the destruction of the first temple. And a different reason that was given is because the Jewish people, when they're in the land of Yisrael, which, by the way, the Creator gave to all Jewish people for all time, eternally, when they settle the Jewish people, there's certain laws of the land. When people are plant food and produce in the ground, then the Creator wanted to test them to see if they're loyal. And every 7 years, they're supposed to not plant the field at all. And they have to rely on the supernatural power of the Creator to give a blessing to the 6th year, to give them enough food to last the 7th year and the entire 8th year until they're able to grow in the 9th year after that. So the Jewish people, for 70 cycles of 7 years, did not keep this law fully. So because of that, the Creator decided to destroy the temple and exile the Jewish people for 70 years to make up for those 70 cycles of the 7 years that the Jewish people did not leave the land of Israel fallow like they were supposed to. Then, in the times of Ezra, the Jewish people came back to the land of Israel about 70 years later. It was prophesied in the book of Daniel that it was going to be 70 years, but it's explained in the prophets and the commentaries that They knew that there was 70 years of exile, but they didn't know exactly what it was counted from. So at a certain point, the 70 years ended, and then the Jewish people went back to the land of Israel, and then they rebuilt the temple. It was slightly different makeup. The temple in Jerusalem the second time, it was a little bit bigger physically, and it stood for a little bit longer. The first temple stood for 410 years. The second temple stood for 420 years. And that, after that, then because of baseless hatred, and a specific story of baseless hatred that's mentioned in the Talmud, but generally there was a lot of baseless hatred, then the Creator decided to destroy the second temple through a year-long siege of the Roman Empire on the Jewish temple. Pretty much the entire Roman Empire was surrounding Jerusalem. They were starving the Jewish people. Jewish people had to resort to cannibalism. Millions of casualties. The blood was flowing like rivers. It was one of the worst massacres that's ever occurred in all of history. And after that, the Jewish people were largely exiled outside the land of Israel. Someone's requesting as a guest. Let's see here. Okay, I'll do it for a few minutes. What's up? Hi, Cab. So I wanted to talk about some other stuff, but I guess if you want to say something, nice to meet you. What's up?
Yeah, I want to talk about the genocide going on in Gaza.
Oh, can I get back to you on that? I wanted to talk about some other stuff real quick. Maybe later. Okay? Sounds good?
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. You can stay on if you want. I'm just going to keep on talking about... Basically, we're talking about in the Jewish... Oh, I guess he left. Yeah, so the point is that after the Jewish people had a lot of baseless hatred with each other, then the Creator decided to destroy the second temple through the Romans, through a year-long siege, and then the Jewish people were largely exiled outside the land of Israel. And the thing is about that both of those destructions, of both the temples, which were... I mean, the first one stood for 410 years, the second one was 420 years, with 70 years in between, so do the math. Basically... both of those days of the destruction for each temples was on the same calendar day, which is on the 9th day of the 11th Jewish month, which was basically 9/11 of the Jewish calendar. And there were two temples, which are essentially like two towers. So there's something going on there. But yeah, there's a lot of intense stories about what happened in the second temple destruction. It says the Romans broke the walls of the temple, which were pretty much unable to be broken for a long time. The Jewish people were extremely strong, and the Jewish people pretty much beat the Romans all the time. But at a certain point, after like a year of starvation, etc., the Jewish people kind of weakened, and then the Romans broke the wall. And it says, interestingly enough, it says, when the Romans entered the innermost sanctuary of the temples, it says it was on a Sunday. But every day, the Levim, which were a certain type of, kind of like a priestly class of Jews, they were saying a certain psalm, a psalm written by King David. Every day they would say a different psalm. So usually on Sunday, they say the psalm in the book of Psalms that says, oh, to Hashem is the world and everything in it, etc. But for that day, because of the siege, the Levites chose to actually say the song... the song and the psalm, it was like a song because they were singing it, but it was really a psalm from the King David. So they were actually singing a psalm that's usually said on the day of Wednesday, which is Hashem is full of vengeance, and it says, it talks about like how the Creator like cuts down the Jewish enemies, etc. And it says, as the Levim were reciting the last verse, which tells the Creator to cut down the Jewish enemies, at that moment, it says the Romans came in and they slaughtered the Levites, and they were not able to say the end of that psalm. It says in the commentaries that if the Levites were able to say that last verse, then the destruction never would have happened. Just an interesting fact. So basically, a lot of stuff happened in this destruction of the Jewish people. A lot of interesting stories during the entire year-long siege of Jerusalem. Basically, long story short, the Jewish people originally had all kinds of storehouses of food that could have lasted them 30 years. And the Romans were not able to breach the walls, basically, because the Jewish people were a lot stronger than all the Romans. But there was a bunch of guys, there's like some Jews at the time that were kind of like going against the rabbis, and they said, oh no, we actually want to fight the Romans, we don't want to deal with things peacefully. And then these Jews actually burnt like 30 years worth of food supplies that were in Israel at the time. Someone said, do you read the Babylonian Talmud? Yeah, when I have free time, basically. We'll talk to that. The Jewish people were exiled from from Israel, different places, but primarily to Babylon. And in Babylon, they composed the Talmud, which is the work of Jewish, the collection of the Jewish traditions that goes back to Moses. So there was also a different set of rabbis that stayed in Israel, and they composed the Israeli Talmud, or the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. And that's also learned, but it's less authoritative because the Creator went with the Jewish people into exile, which we'll talk about. The point is that there was these Jews that basically burned 30 years worth of food supplies, and because of that, the temple was pretty much destroyed. Because if they would not have burned those food supplies, the Jewish people could have just sat in Jerusalem, and then they could have gotten along and figured stuff out. But basically, because of this, the Jewish people only had like a very limited amount of time, and the Romans basically blocked all entry to all foods, and the Jews had to like resort to cannibalism and a lot of pretty brutal stuff. But the point is, both these temples were destroyed on the same calendar day in this month, the 11th month of the Jewish calendar, which is the month of Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, which is coming up. So today is actually the 3rd day of the month of Av, and it's actually explained in some of the commentaries that it's a good thing to learn about the details of the laws of the temple, because in this month, this Jewish month of Av, it's actually called an auspicious time. It's a good time for the 3rd Jewish temple to be rebuilt through the Messiah. When the Messiah comes in Judaism, we believe that there's going to be a Redeemer who's an actual physical human Jewish person who's descended with an unbroken paternal lineage going back to King David and King Solomon, and through him the Creator is going to miraculously rebuild the temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. And this 3rd temple, because it's going to be built by the Creator himself, it says the temple is going to descend from the heavens, it's going to last forever and for all time. And it's essentially going to, in effect, through the Kabbalah teaching, it says the temple in this world is going to basically combine heavens and earth together. Because after the destruction of the first temple in the times of King Solomon, Jewish people were exiled kind of like outside of Israel, a lot of them. And then in the times of the prophet Ezekiel, it says the people who were exiled outside of Yisrael were worried, oh no, maybe the Creator abandoned us because he kicked us outside of Israel, which he's not supposed to do really. But then the Creator had a bunch of prophecies to Ezekiel, many prophecies, but especially one that says, don't worry, I will actually be for them as a miniature temple in the lands that they go, which means that all the lands that the Jewish people go outside of Yisrael during the time of the exile, the Creator himself goes. Someone said I should take a deep breath. Maybe I'll listen one day when Mashiach comes. But yeah, so the Creator himself said that he himself will go everywhere that the Jewish people will go. Meaning that during the time when the temple is standing in Israel, then it's like this is the Creator's Shekhinah. This is like the Creator's energy that's manifested most in that location in Yisrael, specifically in a way that's greater than everywhere else. But when the Jewish people are exiled outside the land, then the Creator, so to speak, that same energy that's in the temple goes with them outside the land of Yisrael to wherever they're going. Yo, what's up, Immortal? Welcome. Just talking about the Jewish temple and this time.
Shalom.
Hello. So yeah, basically, in the times of Ezekiel, there's a lot of prophecies where the Creator said, don't worry, when the Jewish people go outside the land of Israel during the exile, the Creator did not forsake them, God forbid. It's just whatever, for reason, he decided they should be exiled for a temporary time. And during that time, the Creator goes with them in a similar way to how the Creator himself was manifested in the land of Yisrael in the temple. In that same, very similar, almost the same way the Creator goes with them outside, and it says, I will be for them in a miniature sanctuary in the lands they go, meaning like there's at least one specific synagogue outside the land of Yisrael that the Creator is manifested in almost the same exact way that he was manifested in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, meaning that during the time of the exile, the Creator is found, so to speak, more revealed outside of Israel than he is in Israel during the time of the exile. So in the time of Ezekiel, a lot of different prophecies are about this theme. In fact, the first prophecy in the book of Ezekiel, a lot of people read it, but people don't really understand what it's actually saying. It says there's a well-known prophecy of Ezekiel that talks about, oh, the Creator took me up in like this big whirlwind, this being like a tornado, and like I saw like a giant chariot with a bunch of angels, and then it goes into detail. It talks about what kind of angels Ezekiel saw. They had different kinds of legs and arms, and one of them had the face of a lion, and the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle, and it says on top of this chariot was like the image of a man from above, etc. So there's like all this esoteric stuff. People are like, wow, pretty cool prophecy, but people don't actually realize what the actual point of that is saying. The point of that whole prophecy was because the Jewish people who were kicked outside of Yisrael were worried that the Creator abandoned them outside of Israel. But then the point of that prophecy was because when Ezekiel was outside of Israel during that prophecy, the Creator showed him all this stuff which metaphorically represent the Shekhinah, which is the energy of the Creator. And that was outside of the land of Israel. So the whole point of a lot of the book of Ezekiel is to show the Jewish people that even when the Jewish people are exiled, the Creator never forsakes them, because the Creator goes with them in a similar way how he is in the temple outside of Yerushalayim, outside of Yerushalayim and outside of Israel. So during these days, leading up to the 9th day of Av, which commemorates the destruction of the earlier temple, it's a good time for the temple to rebuild. So there's a few things that we're supposed to learn about during this time. One thing is the last 8 chapters of Ezekiel, which talk about in depth the third temple that the Messiah is going to rebuild. The third temple is actually already built in the spiritual worlds. And when the Messiah comes, the Messiah is simply going to reveal it from above to below, essentially. So in the book of Ezekiel, the last 8 chapters, it says that Ezekiel was taken by this angel, and he was essentially taken through the future land of Israel. And he saw this whole vision, like 3D virtual reality experience of the third temple that's already built. And he saw the entire future land of Israel with the future temple standing on the Temple Mount. And the Creator, through this angel, essentially brought Ezekiel through every little chamber and every nook and cranny of the future spiritual temple. And then he later showed him the future land of Israel, how it's going to be like a lot of supernatural stuff going on, and a lot of other stuff. So we learn about that. Maybe we'll learn about that later. There's 8 chapters, from chapters 40 to 48, which talks about in depth the details, very specific measurements of the future temple. But another thing we learn is this thing from the Rambam, the Maimonides, who is an 11th century rabbi who compiled all the laws of the Torah that are recorded in the Talmud, passed down from Moshe from Mount Sinai. And significantly, the Rambam is the only one that compiled all of the laws of the Torah, even the ones that we're not able to do until the Messiah comes, because the Rambam essentially was preparing the world for the Messiah, for everyone to know the exact law. So the Rambam writes in detail all of the laws about what is required to build the temple. What is the Jewish temple? How will it be rebuilt? What is it essentially? So maybe let's dive in a little bit to what the Rambam says. So the Rambam starts out his book in this part called it's the 8th book of his general book series called Mishneh Torah, which is the summarization of the whole Torah. And this is called the Book of the Divine Service, which talks about all the details about how the Jewish people used to work in the Jewish temple, build the Jewish temple, etc. So he starts out by saying, he quotes a verse from the book of Psalms. It says, Shalu Shalom Yerushalayim. It says, pray for Jerusalem's peace. May the ones who love it prosper. And this is he always starts the chapter out with a verse. So let's see what he says after that. So basically, the Rambam goes into details about like what exactly is required by the Jewish people to build a temple. It says there's an actual commandment for all the Jewish people to build a dwelling place for the Creator, otherwise known as the Awtsmoos in Kabbalah. It says that in the Torah, it says, build for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in them. Asuli mikdash v'shachanti besocham. The Creator is saying, when you build for me a physical dwelling place in this world, through that physical dwelling place, I will dwell within the Jewish people. So build for me a temple, and I will dwell in them. That is a scriptural source for building a temple, which is applicable, technically speaking, in all places and times. But as Rambam is going to say, the specific places were limited later. basically, the Jewish people, when they were in the desert, in the times of Moshe, after Moshe got the tablets from Mount Sinai, the first tablets made out of sapphire were actually taken directly from the heavens themselves. It says in the Midrash they were hewn from the throne of glory. They were not of this world at all. They were totally supernatural, totally miraculous in every way. But then when Moshe saw the Jewish people worshiping this golden calf idol, then Moshe just smashed the tablets, because the tablets had written on them, don't worship any graven images, any other gods. So Moshe said, okay, if I break the contract, then the Jewish people can't really be responsible for that. So he broke the contract, he broke the first tablets. Then he later got a second set of tablets from the Creator, which the sapphire came from the earth itself, but then the Creator himself wrote on the second tablets. So basically, and then he came down 80 days and 80 nights later. So basically, after that, they had these two sets of tablets. One had like a bunch of broken pieces of tablets. The second one had just two tablets that the Creator wrote on. And then they needed a place to put these tablets. So the Creator commanded this person called Bezalel in the times of Moshe to build a ark, which means a golden box for these tablets. And around the ark, there was actually a giant house, which was a portable house in the desert. Which one of the main purpose for that house was essentially to hold the tablets, which were in the ark. So there was the innermost sanctuary of it was a portable, like a Lego set temple. They had like the walls were like vertical sockets that had like bases, vertical pillars that like fit with sockets into these really heavy copper bases, and they were able to like build the walls like on the spot wherever they traveled, because they're traveling in the desert. So the minimal thing is that it had like basically the innermost chamber had the ark, which had the tablets, and it had both of the sets of tablets. So 4 total tablets, the first 2 and the second 2 in either one ark or 2 arks. Some people say there's 2 arks, one for the first, one for the second. And then there was a lot of other stuff essentially that the Jewish people would use to serve the Creator every day. And then the second main function of this miniature temple called the tabernacle, or the mishkan, which in the desert, the portable temple, was the ark. The ark and the altar. There was an altar that was in like an outside courtyard where they would offer at least 2 sets of sacrifices every day, or 2 sacrifices every day. I mean, and then sometimes more during certain festivals. And again, like the main purpose of these temples is the ark, which is the place where the tablets are, and the altar, which is the daily sacrifices. And through the combination of both of those things, the Creator himself would be found in the world, and specifically be found through the Jewish people, basically. So the Rambam starts out his summary of this book of talking about the Jewish temple, talking about the history of what were the temples. First, the Jewish people had the temple, this portable temple, in the desert in the times of Moshe. Then they carried it with them over to the land of Yisroel. In the times of Joshua, who was Moses' disciple, the Jewish people actually conquered the land of Canaan, which is a pretty good topic to know about in general. It says, first of all, 3,800 years ago, when Abraham was being chosen, the Creator gave to Abraham the entire land of Canaan. There was Canaanites that were actually living there at the time, which were bad people. And the Creator said, don't worry, because really the land of Yisroel originally belonged to the descendants of Shem, who was Noah's best chosen son. After the flood, Noah made a lottery to divide up the entire world, so people wouldn't really argue about it. And the land of Israel happened to be landed in the lottery. Through this lottery, it landed in the portion of Shem, who was the ancestor of Abraham, etc. So originally it belonged to Shem. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So originally the land of Israel belonged to Shem. Then in the times of Abraham, the Canaanites, who were descended from Ham, started conquering it. So when the Creator chose Abraham to be the father of the Jewish people, the Creator brought him to the land of Canaan, which the Canaanites were conquering from the children of Shem, which was Abraham's family at the time. And he said, don't worry, even though you see these Canaanites living here and conquering the land, I'm only going to allow them to live there for 4 generations, for 400 years. Afterwards, I'm going to give it to you and your descendants forever. So this is a covenant that's mentioned in the book of Genesis, where the Creator tells Abraham, to you and your descendants, I have given this land for all eternity. Sometimes when people talk about the land of Israel, they kind of like they kind of mess up the different arguments. The main argument that we have for the Jewish people having the land of Israel is not just like some kind of historical thing, like, oh yeah, we were here first, whatever, because the Canaanites were there before the Jewish people were there. But the point is that the Canaanites were there. And the creator of the whole universe, who owns the entire universe, has the legal ability to take that land away from the Canaanites and give it to Abraham and his descendants, to Isaac and Jacob forever. So the Jewish people did not actually have it in their possession for a long time. The creator told Abraham, don't worry, in 400 years I'm going to give it to your descendants, and 400 years later, that's when the Jewish people left Egypt, which they were about to go into Israel right away, but because of a lot of delays with the golden calf idol and other stuff, they ended up in the desert for 40 years. But at the end of that 40 years, when Moshe passed away, then Moses' main student, named Joshua, was the one to fulfill that promise that was made to Abraham when they came into the land of Yisrael. Basically, the Jewish people were in what is modern-day the Jordan land after the 40 years in the desert. That's where they ended up. They were on the other side of the Jordan River. So there's a giant river separating them from the land of Yisrael. And then in the book of Joshua, it mentions there was a giant miracle where the priests took the ark that had the tablets in it, and they stood on the other side of the Jordan, and then miraculously, because of that ark there, the water of the Jordan started flowing upwards in a vertical line. And the entire inhabitants, all the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, saw this miraculous water flowing upwards, and they knew that the Creator was actually taking the land away from them and giving it to the Jewish people. So after the Jewish people went into the land of Canaan in the times of Joshua, then there was 14 years, 7 years where they spent conquering the land from each of the 7 Canaanite nations that were living there. And after the Jewish people conquered all the land, they spent 7 additional years dividing the land up amongst themselves. So 14 years later, the Jewish people were fully living in the land of Israel. Then they went to this place called Gilgal, and where they had like a temporary, where they had this temporary mishkan that they had before. Similar idea. Then they came to the time of to another place called Shiloh in Israel, which is mentioned throughout the books of like the prophets and the judges, etc. And in Shiloh, I believe it stood for 369 years, which is a long time. And then, as we get closer to King David, this is all before King David, like in the early Judges, when the Jewish people first started living in Israel. Then there's like a temporary tabernacle, which is kind of like a combination of the one in the desert and like a future one. It wasn't exactly the same as one in the desert. It was similar, but they like took the same roof, which was like these special curtains, and they spread those curtains on top of this tabernacle in Shiloh and other places. And then eventually, during the times of King David, then it went other places to this place called Nob and Gidon, etc. And then finally, in the times of King David, then the Creator decided to build a permanent house for the Creator to be revealed in through the ark and the altar, etc. Earlier, there was like these other mini temples that people could offer sacrifices in pretty much anywhere. But in the times of King David, the Creator said he is choosing Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, as an eternal place. And when the Creator chose Yerushalayim, it says that everywhere else in the world became forbidden to offer any sacrifices at anywhere. Only Jerusalem was allowed to have the sacrifices in at that time. But the King David didn't actually build it. King David just played it out. Then his son, King Solomon, built the first temple. And then the Rambam basically says that after King Solomon's temple stood, then after King Solomon's temple was destroyed 410 years later, we have Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, who was a prophet who existed at the time of the destruction of the King Solomon, who prophesied mainly about the future temple. So the thing is that Ezekiel's prophecy through the chapters of 40 to 48 was a prophecy of this future temple that the Messiah is going to build. But the Messiah didn't actually come at that time. And 70 years later, in the times of Ezra, it says they took those measurements from the prophecy of Ezekiel and they kind of changed them around a little bit, and they built what we call now as the second temple. I mean, they didn't call it. I mean, no, I think they called it that. Yeah, the second temple. But really, it wasn't like really necessarily supposed to be built, because really we're supposed to go right from the destruction of King Solomon's just to the Messiah, because Ezekiel had a prophecy of the Messiah's temple. But for whatever reason, in the times of Ezra, they realized that, I guess, I mean, maybe that it could have been Messiah's temple at the time, but for whatever reason, the measurements in the times of Ezra were not exactly the same as the prophecy mentioned in Ezekiel. It was similar. Yeah, they follow those examples, and then that stood for 420 years, basically. So the Rambam then says, like, the minimal definition, what exactly is this chosen house? Like, what is the actual minimum requirement for building this house? Because the commandment to build the house, the Creator, applies at all times, basically. So it says the minimum, the basic minimum requirement is that it should first have what's called like the holy, which is this, it's essentially like the inner sanctuary, the indoors sanctuary of the temple, which generally has, it had like a golden menorah on one side, it had a golden altar for incense in the middle, and it had another table for this bread they would put out that the priests would later eat. And then on the inside of that inner of that general indoor sanctuary, there was the innermost sanctuary called the Holy of Holies, which was usually hidden by a wall or a curtain, whose job is to house the Ark of the Covenant primarily. So all those two things together are called the Heichal. First, the Holy of Holies, like the innermost sanctuary. Then the Holy is like another area that's outside. But together, those are both called the Heichal, which translates to palace, literally, because it's like the indoor aspect. In the times of the temples, you can see the pictures of it. It basically has like the main part is like an indoors building, and then outside is called the Azara, which is essentially the minimal definition is like some kind of gated or walled courtyard that has to be open to the sky, but it's like surrounding this inner temple. And the main job of the Azara is to hold the altar, which is where they would have the sacrifices, the daily sacrifices. And altogether, those three things, technically speaking, are the main basic definition of what the mikdash, what the temple is. Yeah, so then the Rambam goes into like the minimal requirements of the stuff that needs to go in this temple. So there's first of all altars. There's one altar that's in the outer courtyard where the Jewish people were commanded to offer animal sacrifices every day. And then there was an inner altar made out of gold that was in the indoor part where they would offer incense every day. And at least the outer altar was really big, so it had like a giant ramp that was placed on the south side to walk up onto it. But the priests would walk up walk up this ramp, and then they would throw the sacrifices onto the ramp, onto the altar, and burn them every day. And then there was also something called a laver, or a laver, however you say it in English. It was basically a copper basin kind of thing that the priests would use to wash their hands and feet before doing anything else. When the Jewish priests would do these different animal sacrifices and stuff in the temple, everything was very exact. They had to follow a very specific set of instructions. They had to, for example, they had to be barefoot, and they had to only wear very certain kinds of clothes. So they would basically wash their hands and feet in a very specific way in order to do anything. Then, as we mentioned, there's an incense altar on the inside where they would offer certain kinds of incense every day. And then there was a golden menorah of 7 branches that was lit every day. And then there was a table that had certain types of bread that the priests would eat, and it would just sit there pretty much all week for different spiritual reasons. So then the Rambam says, on this the inner part, which was like the whole heichal, the inner palace part that had everything, says it had 3 things. It had the menorah, which was a golden menorah, kind of like the ones we have for Hanukkah, except the ones we have for Hanukkah have 9 branches, 8 branches for the candles, and then the 9th one in the middle for the server candle. But in the times of the temple, it had 7 branches, which was like one middle branch surrounded by 3 other branches on each side. And the menorah was straight. It was not bent like that. It was straight out, according to the Rambam, which is what we accept, and according to all of the commentaries as well. So if you're looking at it from the top down, I have a picture somewhere, but whatever. If you're looking at it like from the top down, with west being at the top, so to speak, then on the left side, which is the south, the menorah was placed. Then towards the west, in the middle, you had the golden square altar for the incense. And on the right side, you had this other table that had this bread that sat out there for an entire week. So these are like some of the minimum amounts of stuff that are needed for making a sanctuary for the creator. So like it doesn't explain like in depth like all the spiritual reasoning, but the creator said like, okay, you got to make this, got to make that. Like this is like the basics, what you got to do. You could also like elaborate on like a lot of cool designs, whatever. Like what does it mean to house the creator in the physical world? This is what it means. Got to have a menorah, got to have an altar, got to have some bread sitting out all week. These are like the minimal definitions for what it means to reveal the creator in the world, basically. So the original temporary temples were kind of built of different stuff, but the requirement of building the other temples, the permanent temples in Jerusalem, it says the basic requirement is that it has to be made out of perfect stone and not iron, not any kind of iron. And the stone is kind of interesting kind of stone because it says they were not allowed to cut the stone using any kind of metal instruments. In the times of King Solomon, it was actually pretty interesting how they cut the stones for the temple. There's a whole story how Solomon had to go find the king of the demons named Ashmodai. There's a bunch of demons in Judaism, which are, it's debatable what they actually are. They're kind of some kind of spiritual creatures that were around since creation, and they could do different stuff. It says like in Egypt, the Egyptians kind of like hacked them to do like sorcery, and the sorcery the Egyptians had, it says in the commentaries, they were able to like they were able to make something. They were able to make things look like they were able to like change one thing into another thing, like, oh look, I have this in my hand and now I have this, so I changed it miraculously. But really it was just a trick, because they would just kind of like, for whatever reason, communicate with these demons who were able to travel really fast. So like the demons were able to like switch the thing in their hand with something else, and they were invisible, so like you don't really realize, and it looks like the Egyptians are able to like change things around, but really they're not actually doing anything. They're just like having the demons help them out. So basically there's this concept of demons in the Torah, and King Solomon actually met the king of these demons who helped him build the temple, because the king gave him a special kind of worm, and this worm, called the shamir worm, they were able to just like put it on top of the bricks, and then when the bricks would see this worm, which had like a certain holiness to the creator, then the bricks would automatically split right in half perfectly. And in fact, this worm is actually related to the modern day state of Israel, because the Lubavitcher Rebbe, one time he told some official who came to see him, I forgot exactly what his name was, but the Rebbe told him to pass the message on to someone who was named Shamir in recent times. I think he was on the Knesset or something, and then the Rebbe told him that he was trying to get this message out to him through other people, but no one really wanted to deliver the message for whatever reasons. But the Rebbe told him to tell this guy who was named Shamir that you got to be strong when it comes to these enemies of Israel. You can't just like sit back and like kind of give in to their demands. You got to be like the Shamir worm. The Shamir worm King Solomon used to build the temple. It was standing its ground. When the stones would see this worm, the stones would just like, so to speak, be taken over by this divine energy of the creator, by this worm, and they would just split. So it says, when this guy in the Knesset named Shamir, if he would just hold his ground, never give in to any demands from the other evil side, never give away land, just hold his ground, then the enemy says they will realize the holiness of the creator that's in them, and then they will automatically just make peace. So it basically, the stones were not allowed in the temple. They're not allowed to be hewn with any iron instruments. They're only pure stone, and it was pretty brutal how to build them. But it says, in fact, in the future temple, through the Messiah, since it's going to be built by the Creator himself, the stones are kind of like already cut. So it does say that it will have iron. It will have iron. But the original temple was not allowed to have any iron at all. And also, they're not allowed to have any wood that makes a protruding image for different reasons. Basically, it was all just stone and bricks. No iron, no wood, anything like that. And yeah, they had all kinds of cool like white stones that were pretty much like perfectly polished and pretty intense. They spent like a lot of time like cleaning and whitening the courtyard. The courtyard, this outdoor courtyard, had like a lot of stones on the floor, which were like perfect stones that people had to spend a lot of time cleaning. All these are kind of like somewhat secondary to the actual main thing. These are like extra things that they would do in the temple. And it says it's a mitzvah to like we said, it's to beautify the temple according to the wealth of the community, and to like make a lot of gold structures if the community is able to afford it. So these are all like extra things that you could do. The original things where the Rambam was saying the basic bare minimum of what do you actually need to reveal the Creator in the world. You need to have like the Holy of Holies with the Ark. You need to have the Holy with the menorah and the incense altar and the bread table. Then you need to have the courtyard with the outer with the outer altar that they would offer the sacrifices on, with the little copper basin to wash the hands and feet. Those are like the basics of the basics. Then there's like a bunch of other stuff, like have nice polished floors, have a lot of gold everywhere, and like increase the beauty according to what people can do. And it says the obligation to build the temple is during the daylight hours and not during the night. And it says if someone is learning, it says everyone is obligated to build it either with their own body or with their money to contribute it to it, or there's a third thing, but I can't think of what it is. Their body and money. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Maybe there was a third thing. But it says generally everyone is supposed to contribute, except people who are busy learning Torah. Because learning Torah is pretty much like also reveals the Creator in the world. So if someone's already learning Torah, then they shouldn't be interrupted from their Torah learning to build the temple. And it says, yeah, so the altar that was in the outer courtyard that they would use to make the animal sacrifices, as opposed to the inner one, which was the incense, it had to be made of one big stone that was connected. It was essentially like this interesting structure. I have some pictures of it, actually. I'm going to bring it up. Yeah, so this is basically a picture of what the future altar is going to look like according to the prophecy of Ezekiel. And the other altars were similar. They had like this interesting like structure with like different levels going up. Basically, it was one big stone that was connected. It could not be made of other stones and then later combined together. It had to be one essential stone. And the way they would make it, they would make like a mold. They would make like a big mold of like use different things to make a mold, and then they would fill the mold in with stone, and then use different techniques to make it such that it's all one big piece, basically. So it can't be like combined with other stuff. Yeah, and if someone like has any kind of iron instrument that hits these stones, then the whole thing becomes invalid. So it's pretty brutal. Yeah, any stone that's touched by iron becomes invalid for the altar. Then they have to like remake the whole thing, which is pretty brutal. So don't bring any stones to it. Yeah, and it says if it gets, yeah. So if there's not besides for the altar, like if there's other places that have like a bunch of stones combined, if the iron hits that stone of the temple, then they could somehow just replace that one stone, but they're not allowed to leave the stone in. No iron is allowed. But the general reason is because iron was designed to shorten the life of people through like, you know, swords and stuff are weapons which shorten life. But the purpose of this temple and the altars, etc., in Jerusalem is to lengthen the life of everything and to increase life in the world. So that's the general reason why there's not allowed to have any iron. But when the Messiah comes, when there's not going to be any more death in the world, then there could be iron, for different reasons. So all the other things, all of the stuff that's like the menorah and the inner altar, like all the other stuff, have to be made of some kind of metal, either gold, copper, but they weren't allowed to make it out of other stuff like wood. So people used to use bones to make certain things. They weren't allowed to use bones or wood or anything. That's only used metal. And so yeah, basically the community would have to donate their money to make this stuff in the temple. And if they're rich enough, really a lot of the stuff should be made out of gold. But if they're not rich enough, they could make it even out of tin, which is a lot cheaper. So basically, like, it has to be made out of metal, but the specific types of metal depends on the wealth of the people. And it says, yeah, it couldn't just be like anything that's used. People couldn't just like donate some random cup from their house. Like, it has to be made like specifically for that. Or if someone's donating something, it has to go through like a certain ritual in order to become holy, to be used for it. You can't just use like anything. And if there's a stone that was built into the temple and then it was later like disqualified because it had some iron hit it, they were not allowed to use that stone for other stuff. It was holy. Once it's holy, once the holiness comes into the temple, it's holy forever. So yeah, basically that's the basic summary of chapter 1 of the Rambam's laws of the chosen house, for building a chosen house for the Creator. I have to go soon because I only have half of 1% of battery left, but is there anything you wanted to say, Immortal, before I go? Maybe. Hello? Maybe not. Okay, I don't know if you heard me. He's probably not there. It's okay. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. And yeah, the laws of the chosen house. pretty cool. We'll be back with the creator's help soon.